closely because what I am about to reveal is not being discussed on CNBC, not being debated on Bloomberg, and definitely not being spoon-fed to retail by crypto Twitter, because today something quietly shifted in the XRP and Ripple ecosystem that forces a very uncomfortable question. Are XRP holders about to be positioned directly in front of a global liquidity realignment, while the rest of the market is distracted by noise, memes, and manufactured fear? Because when you zoom out and connect the dots between Ripple's closed-door conversations, the SEC's increasingly awkward silence, the IMF's sudden obsession with cross-border settlement efficiency, and BlackRock's expanding appetite for tokenized infrastructure, you start to see a pattern that screams preparation rather than speculation. And if you think that's dramatic, then ask yourself why major financial institutions keep circling the exact problem XRP was built to solve while pretending the solution doesn't exist. And before we go any further, do me a favor right now. Tap the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what we're unpacking today is time sensitive, and the people who catch this early are always the ones who later say, how did everyone else miss this? Because today's XRP news is not about a headline price candle or a fake influencer rumor. It's about positioning, leverage, and narrative control. And the reason this matters today specifically is because behind the scenes, the conversation has shifted from whether blockchain will be used by legacy finance to which rails will survive when liquidity demands speed, compliance, and scale simultaneously. And this is where things get uncomfortable for XRP critics, because Ripple has already been stress testing relationships with banks, payment corridors, and regulatory frameworks while the SEC plays legal chess in public. And here's the extreme question nobody wants to ask out loud. What happens if the lawsuit narrative was never about killing XRP, but about freezing it in place until the infrastructure around it was ready? Because that single thought flips the entire risk model on its head, and suddenly the fear looks engineered and the patience looks strategic. And today, XRP holders need to understand that the signals are not loud. They are subtle. They are buried in policy language, pilot programs, and institutional phrasing that only makes sense if you assume adoption is being staged rather than rushed. And this is why mainstream media keeps missing it, because they chase volatility while real money prepares plumbing. And if you're still here, it's because you already sense that something feels off in a way that usually precedes massive repricing events. So stay locked in, because in the next part we're going to bring receipts, timelines, authority signals, and institutional breadcrumbs that make this look less like hype and more like a controlled ignition sequence that could leave latecomers asking WTF just happened. Respected insiders, now we shift from intuition to evidence, because this is where the conversation gets dangerous for anyone still dismissing XRP as just another altcoin. And I want you to listen to this slowly, because the data points only make sense when you line them up the way institutions do, not the way influencers tweet about them. Because while retail is obsessed with daily candles, Ripple has been stacking regulatory wins, strategic partnerships, and infrastructure approvals that quietly position XRP in rooms most crypto projects will never even be invited into. And let's start with the obvious authority signal that people keep underestimating: the partial legal clarity coming out of the SEC case. Because regardless of how you emotionally feel about the SEC, the reality is that no other major crypto asset has been stress-tested this aggressively in a U.S. courtroom and survived with this level of operational continuity, and that alone sends a message to banks, governments, and funds that XRP is battle-hardened. And while the headlines screamed uncertainty, Ripple was still expanding payment corridors, still onboarding partners, still talking to central banks about CBDC infrastructure. And if you think that's coincidence, then explain why the IMF, the BIS, and World Economic Forum white papers keep circling the same language around interoperability, instant settlement, and liquidity efficiency. Language that maps uncomfortably well to what XRP and the XRPL already do. And here's where BlackRock enters the chat indirectly, because when Larry Fink talks about tokenization of real-world assets and the future of settlement layers, he's not talking about memes. He's talking about rails that can move value instantly at scale with compliance baked in. And those rails don't get built overnight. They get tested quietly, legally, and globally. And this is why Ripple's meetings with policymakers matter more than XRP's short-term price action. because institutional capital does not chase assets with unresolved regulatory posture. It waits until clarity emerges and then moves violently. And here's another uncomfortable data point. XRP's liquidity behavior during market stress events has consistently shown resilience compared to thinner order book assets, which is exactly what institutions look for when planning large-scale transfers. And while critics laugh at partnerships, banks do not sign MOUs for fun. They sign them to explore cost reduction, speed advantages, and risk mitigation. And Ripple keeps showing up in those conversations while others are filtered out early. And ask yourself this extreme question. If XRP were truly irrelevant, why would regulators, banks, and global institutions keep spending time, energy, and legal resources around it? Because irrelevance doesn't require suppression. It requires silence, and XRP has never been silent in the rooms that matter. And this is where authority really flexes. Because the absence of hype from Ripple compared to other projects is itself a signal. Serious infrastructure doesn't scream, it deploys. And what you are seeing now is the slow tightening of a narrative that transitions from speculative asset to financial utility. And once that transition becomes obvious, the repricing is rarely gentle. So keep your attention sharp, because next we're going to talk about the catalyst everyone is misreading and how the fear, doubt, and dismissal around XRP may actually be the smokescreen that protects accumulation phases from public interference. Respected strategists, this is the part where emotions get weaponized and where weak hands are manufactured. Because every major repricing event in financial history is preceded by confusion, ridicule, and coordinated dismissal, and XRP is currently swimming in all three, which should immediately raise alarms for anyone who studies market psychology rather than crypto Twitter. Because the catalyst everyone is misreading is not a single announcement or a viral headline. It's the convergence of regulatory exhaustion, institutional readiness, and liquidity necessity all happening at the same time. And when those three forces collide, the market doesn't ask permission. It revalues assets brutally. And this is why the FUD around XRP has been so persistent and repetitive for years. Because the easiest way to control positioning is to convince people that patience equals stupidity. And yet Ripple has survived bear markets, lawsuits, exchange delistings, and narrative attacks while continuing to build. And that alone should make you question who actually needed XRP to fail and who benefited from suppressing its perception. And let's dismantle the biggest FUD point head-on, the claim that banks will never use XRP because that argument ignores how liquidity works at scale. Banks do not care about your ideological purity. They care about cost, speed, and risk. And when legacy systems fail to meet those demands, they get replaced quietly, not debated publicly. And the second FUD attack is the idea that XRP supply makes price appreciation impossible, which is one of the most intellectually lazy arguments in crypto, because price is not determined by supply alone, it's determined by velocity, demand, and utility. And when an asset is used as a bridge for liquidity rather than a static store of value, its demand profile changes completely. And this is why XRP behaves differently than speculative assets during certain market phases. And then there's the classic centralized attack, which conveniently ignores that institutions prefer assets with identifiable governance, legal accountability, and predictable behavior, not anonymous chaos. And here's the conspiracy. Nobody wants to say out loud, decentralization is a spectrum, and the parts of that spectrum that institutions trust are the ones that survive integration. And this is where the catalyst sharpens, because as global payments strain under higher volumes, geopolitical fragmentation, and instant settlement expectations, the tolerance for slow, expensive rails drops to zero. And when that happens, the market doesn't rotate gently. It snaps, and XRP sits exactly at that snapping point, defended by legal precedent, reinforced by partnerships, and misunderstood by retail, which is the perfect storm for violent upside. And the louder the dismissals get, the more likely it is that positioning is being finalized behind closed doors, because no institution wants retail front-running infrastructure adoption. And if this feels uncomfortable, it should, because the biggest opportunities never feel safe in the moment. They feel lonely, ridiculed, and uncertain. And that's by design. So brace yourself, because in the next part, we're going to confront the number everyone argues about: price. and why the current valuation narrative may be the most misleading story in all of crypto right now. Respected investors, now we get to the part that separates casual observers from the players who actually profit, because the price discussion around XRP is not about hype. It's about infrastructure, adoption velocity, and the invisible hand of institutional positioning. And let me be brutally clear, the current market price is a reflection of perception, not reality. And this is why mainstream charts are actively misleading, because they ignore the real demand signals coming from corridors, liquidity pools, and cross-border settlement experiments that are quietly operational right now. And when you layer in Ripple's ongoing negotiations with central banks, fintech giants, and liquidity providers, you begin to see why traditional market models fail here, because price is no longer just supply and demand. It's permissioned access to capital flows that can move billions without causing alarm. And here's the extreme question everyone refuses to ask. If XRP suddenly becomes the preferred bridge asset for multiple institutional corridors, what happens to its current price? And don't give me that weak, it depends on adoption nonsense, because adoption is already happening. It's just invisible to retail. And this is where the final warning comes in, because the retail panic that dominates social feeds is the exact friction the market exploits to move XRP into the hands of those who actually matter. And the moment those hands are full and corridors are live, the repricing can happen in a matter of hours, not weeks. And this is where most people will be blindsided, because you've been trained to watch candles and ignore context. And the context is explosive, with legal validation, institutional demand, and infrastructure readiness all pointing to a phase shift that will make previous ATHs look trivial. And if you think that's hyperbolic, consider this. BlackRock, Citi, HSBC, and other top-tier liquidity managers are actively researching tokenized settlement rails, and Ripple sits squarely at the intersection of compliance, speed, and global reach, a combination that is almost impossible to replicate. And here's the brutal truth: the price will not wait for consensus or retail sentiment. It will reflect utility. And when that reality hits, the market will move violently. And that's why preparation matters more than timing, because missing the accumulation window means buying into momentum rather than strategy. And anyone still doubting XRP's capacity to explode in value under these conditions is simply ignoring the signals from regulatory alignment, institutional positioning, and liquidity stress tests, which together create an ignition sequence that is already in motion. And let me repeat, this is not theory, this is observable behavior if you connect the dots correctly, and the moment corridors go live and adoption is publicly visible, the reaction will be swift, unforgiving, and probably shocking to anyone not paying attention. And this is why XRP holders today need to understand that patience combined with awareness is the only shield against being blindsided by what could be the most aggressive, institution-driven repricing event in crypto history. Respected viewers, as we draw this full picture to a close, here's the reality nobody else is telling you. XRP is no longer just a speculative asset for retail traders to gamble on. It is a strategically positioned financial instrument quietly gaining institutional momentum while the world obsesses over irrelevant volatility. And if you've paid attention to the legal developments, the bank partnerships, and the subtle but consistent signals from the IMF, BIS, and even BlackRock, you now understand why the market's current complacency is not safety. It's opportunity, a rare window where infrastructure, adoption, and legal clarity align perfectly before the broader world catches on. And make no mistake, when that alignment becomes visible, the repricing will be swift, brutal, and indiscriminate, separating those who acted on knowledge from those who relied on headlines. And this is your final call to action. Monitor the corridors, track institutional signals, stay aware of Ripple's regulatory progress, and above all, resist the panic engineered by social feeds and short-term FUD. Because the truth is, XRP's trajectory has been quietly orchestrated for years, and now it's reaching a phase where the market is about to pay attention whether it's ready or not. And for holders, understanding this, acting strategically, and staying informed is the only way to convert patience into potential profit, while everyone else is left asking, WTF just happened? Because, make no mistake, the signals are here, the institutions are here, and the question isn't whether XRP will move, it's whether you'll be ready when it does.